Welcome to the Gems Podcast with Shom, a podcast about beat digging, records, and other things. Today, I'm joined by Arcee, writer, artist, and creative director, one of the creators of CrateryCon. Thanks for joining me, brother.
What's up, Sean? Nice to be here, man.
I should mention for our audience straight away, Arcee taught me everything I know about digging. So if you hear me on this podcast talking to other guests, flexing my record knowledge, music knowledge, you'll know where it came from. Arcee is certainly a day one. So I'm glad we can hang on the show today, man.
Dude, it's great to be here, man. And we go back a long time, man. We've known each other since we were kids, man. So this is a unique set of circumstances to be talking about digging, but also doing it with somebody that I go really, really, really far back with, man. So it is a pleasure, man. A pleasure to be here with you, man, and to talk the things that we love to talk about, man.
Yeah, it's like talking in your basement, except with people listening. So
It's
like that.
literally that. It's literally exactly that.
Yeah. I've been there a few times, learned a lot about records there. All right. So let's get into it. You've been through so many phases as an artist, hosting one of the best regional hip hop shows, fantastic writing, work as a creative director, and always building your insane record collection. Where did the idea of starting a record convention come from?
Well, we're starting a new convention this year called CrateryCon, and it's happening right at the end of the month here in Toronto, September 26th to 28th. And the idea really came from the fact that I was part of a crew that did another convention for several years called Live Convention, and that convention started out with four friends, famously K Wonder, myself, Arcee, and DJ Sirius, and we sort of collectively put that convention on for 7 years. And once that ran its course, as sometimes things do, Sirius and I decided to start up CrateryCon and keep the tradition going, man. So it's really something that's been near and dear to my sort of annual planning and annual sort of like things that I look forward to, you know what I mean, in terms of like doing something that we all love to do. But the impetus for the convention really came from Famous Lee, who was one of the co-founders of Live Convention. We were doing a record show called the Cratery Record Exchange. That was the idea of K Wonder of Cratery, and that started off in a barber shop. And basically, Famous Lee had a party that he was doing called Love Handle, and he came to us with the idea of, hey man, we should combine these two things. I'll bring Love Handle, you guys bring the Cratery Record Exchange. We could do it on a slightly larger scale and make a weekend out of it. And that's how Live Convention was created. And then we collectively, kind of the four of us, built that over the course of like 7 years, right? So that's where the idea started. And when we started to do it, you really started to kind of fall in love with the idea of community, right? Because that was the real difference in terms of what that particular convention was, you know what I mean, in the sense that like you had a collective community of people that weren't necessarily just from Toronto. You had people that were from New Jersey, from Delaware, from Osaka in some cases, right? You had people from North Carolina, you had people from who were coming in from Montreal, you had people from, you know what I mean? So it started to build a real sense of community, of people around this like really niche idea. When you really think about it, it's a shared reference point, for people that grew up on hip hop music, and learn and really, use sampling as a gateway drug to learn about all of this music. And there's a generation of people like that, and I'm part of that generation. And it's pretty niche, but I feel like that generation of people don't have their own show, right? They don't have their own thing like that, right? Most record shows you go to, straight up, especially in Canada, it's just like, it's just the old white dudes, slanging classic rock records, right? And then there's some jazz stuff thrown in, and some other esoteric stuff, some psychedelic things, you know what I mean, certainly some some soulful or even like island Caribbean things as well. But the idea of starting the convention, really came from, famously having the party and K Wonder starting the Cratery Record Exchange. Those two things were like the actual existence of those two things. And then, the idea to bring those two things together came, from there. But then, we all collectively built it over the course of like, 7 years. You know what I mean? So that's the story. And really the community around it is really what the motivation is to keep it going.
I think it's interesting because you mentioned the origins. A lot of the people basically beat diggers from Toronto, Canada. However, it's very international. People come from all over the world. And I think that's what makes it especially interesting for people to converge that way.
Yeah, man. I think like there's this, these scenes are so niche. There's not really one, city that can sustain a full scene like this. And it's funny, I feel like even a city that could, like New York City, sometimes like they're just too cool to want to do shit like this. You know what I mean? Like, because they're surrounded, they are culture in so many ways, right? So sometimes it takes, some outside eyes to like throw a lens on that stuff in a way that's a bit different. And I think doing it in Toronto, I mean, people asked a good friend of mine, Jake One, like, hey man, why do they do this thing in Toronto, and like of all places, like why not Chicago, why not Miami, why not New York, whatever, right? And it was just like, yo, because these guys care more. You know what I mean? That was his answer. He's like, these guys actually care to take the time to do it, right? So you know, that's the long and short of it. But the idea is basically that if everybody can get together, in one place once a year, then that is realistic and sustainable. You know what I mean? Rather than, trying to do something like every week, right? Not to, shit on anybody who's doing something every week. I mean, I feel like if you can do that, like that means you got it like that. Me personally, nobody wants to hear my nerd records, you know what I mean, on a weekly basis. You know what I mean? So, I feel like doing something on an annual basis and doing it, building it in a way that, that it's worth people, spending their time and energy and frankly money too to come out. It's worth it. And that's what we're really excited about with CrateryCon is really just being able to carry on that tradition, but also build on it and bring new things and new ideas and new thinking to the table. Like one of the things that we're really excited about this year is, we're doing a talk with Large Professor, who's going to be
Crazy.
coming up. Most times when Large Pro comes and does a show or a podcast or something like, there might be some surface level discussion about records or, you know what I mean? But there's never really a deep dive, man. And records are such a huge part of, his daily life, like he really loves to dig, like he loves to put music together, right? And I think it's interesting to have a conversation with with people in front of an audience that understands and appreciates you know records and record culture, a guy that innovated so much of it. So I'm really excited about that conversation. We're going to deep dive into some drum breaks and all kinds of stuff, with Large Pro, and following that, we're going to do a drum break clash, and I don't even know if anyone's ever seen anything like this before, but two of the heaviest drum break collectors we know, my man Hedrick Hender, representing Canada, and my man Supreme LaRock, representing Seattle, Washington, in the United States, and two guys that really have dedicated their lives in some form or fashion to the culture of collecting breaks. It's such a hip hop thing. You know what I mean? Like collecting breaks. Um, and it's something that stays with us, like for years and years and years. Even now, I don't even make beats, but I got like four crate, I got like all the, like most of these crates up along this wall is all drum breaks. You know what I mean? And it's like, dude, I don't even, it's just cultural. It's so like just, like, man, like gotta have that, man. It's just a classic break, man. So anyways, breaks are a part of digging culture, right? So, doing a drum clash like this that celebrates, you know what I mean? Um, the culture of that is going to be interesting. It's going to be 10 records, 10 categories, and Large Pro's going to judge it. So, you know, stuff like that, like that to me is just like, it's fun cultural stuff to do, for digging culture. So that's kind of the thing that, excites us about being able to put on events like CrateryCon.
That sounds incredible. It certainly would appeal to the people who listen to this podcast. A lot of beat digging is quite niche, but I think something you've shown through doing these conventions over the years, a lot of people like this stuff. A lot of people like this stuff. And as someone who has a podcast, I can't believe how many people are interested in it or gravitate towards it in a relatively short period of time. I think what you guys do is bring these like-minded people together in real life, which is rare in this world. So I think it's amazing. Just while we're at it, I mean, if you can share the details, and I'll share any kind of details on where they can find out more dates, locations, or anything else.
Yeah, I mean the easiest thing would be to follow us on Instagram at CrateryCon, 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 one word, or you can follow Cratery.com. So Cratery and then .com on Instagram as well, yeah, all the details for all the events and stuff are up there, and our website is actually going to be up this week, so you know pretty, like right to the finish line, but this is how we do it. This is how we do it. So but really excited about it. So September 26th to 28th, Toronto, follow at CrateryCon, check our stuff out, and hope you guys can attend, if not this year, then another year.
I'll share the details. So everyone can find out. I think it's important because an event like this, kind of structure around it, is very thoughtful, and it kind of celebrates digging, and it, in a way, legitimizes it. This elevates it, gives it a sense of community. So I really think, I mean, it's amazing. I'm excited to go. I think the sky's the limit for something like this. I feel like you can keep going, make it bigger and different over time.
Thanks, man. Well, we'll see how year one goes on CrateryCon, but we're really excited about it.
So tell me about your early exposure to the world of beat digging.
Well, I mean, the whole beat digging thing came like much later, like probably not even till well, I guess it would have been like early 90s, you know what I mean? Like that's probably when I first started to kind of like be a lot more curious about that world, because I started, probably in my teenage years is when I started to really fall in love with hip hop and started to get involved with rhyming and trying to make records. And when you're trying to make records, one of the first things that you learn is that you need samples. So I didn't have a group, I didn't have sort of anybody else. I just had myself. So in doing that, I just started to look through my dad's records, look through stuff that was already in my house, and I found a couple of random things. My parents grew up listening to sort of Western pop music. You're like Stevie Wonders, Bob Marley, ABBA, Simon and Garfunkel. You know what I mean? Sort of a mixed bag of like Western pop music and like Indian classical music and stuff like that, right? So there was limited crates that my dad had, basically, right? So what I started to do was I went to the public library, and this wasn't, by design or anything like that. This was just because I was there studying, with friends. A frequent activity would be like, oh, let's study together at the library. It wasn't really studying, you know what I mean? We're socializing, we're hanging out. There's probably members of the opposite sex there, you know what I mean? So there's all kinds of other things that are, distracting us. But at the same time, what the public library had was records and cassettes. And so when I would go there and study, I would actually be kind of like digging through, like they had like a little jazz section, they had a jazz cassette section. And what I would do is I would take these cassettes out, literally just take them out from the library, and I would make pause tapes at home. I had a double cassette recorder, and I basically just used to take these cassettes and little sections of them, the parts that I liked, I would just pause tape them. And when I would go to the studio, I would play the pause tape and I'd be like, this is my loop, and this is the original cassette that it came from. Can you loop it to make it sound like this? And then like put these drums under it, that kind of thing. Right. So it was like early production, but I was doing it with tapes that I got from the public library. You know what I mean? Um, so that was like my earliest foray, right? And then I started going to like, your record stores like your HMV and places like that were local to where I grew up, which is in Mississauga. It's a suburb of Toronto. So like, very shopping malls. There wasn't like, a ton of like mom and pop used record stores, at least that I knew of, because I wasn't, the the demographic to be buying that. I would be going to the shopping mall and just buying whatever new tapes or CDs or whatever it was, right? So they would have compilations of like different, Blue Note, funk or whatever, you know what I mean? Stuff like that, right? Like again, early 90s stuff, right? You'd also start to see like the advent of like sample credits, right? So now when you're reading a tribe album, the liner notes, it says, oh, yo, like, sample Grant Green, sampled, Average White Band, Minnie Riperton, all these names, right? So, oh shit, they have this on this compilation. Okay, I'm going to buy it. So that's how I kind of started to learn, was the public library compilations. And then eventually I got to Play D, going digging downtown, and then you start to get like more advanced compilations, if you will. Like, you know what I mean? Like it's almost like a deeper set of records, because the people that are buying the records in there have a deeper understanding of music than the buyer at HMV, right?
Yeah.
So
And for our audience, Play D Record is a legendary Toronto record store in the city. And people like Arcee, people like myself, I mean, many people would go from the suburb, trip to the city, which is kind of far, especially if you're taking public transit, and you'd go to Play D Record as well as other record stores. So it was like kind of a gathering point um, of music culture in a lot of ways, DJ culture especially.
yeah, yeah. So so you start buying, those kind of compilation records and stuff like that. And then I just met people along the way, well, one of the most important ones was Mr. Attic of the Grassroots, you know what I mean? And I met him around like 1995-ish, and he really introduced me to, you know, like going to used stores, buying original vintage records, like searching and searching and searching for stuff, taking risks, taking gambles, you know what I mean, on things that you didn't know that were cheap. So like he kind of like, you know, like gave me my instincts, like he sort of helped develop my instincts, you know what I mean, is Mr. Attic, man. And he was already at that time like just he had such a pedigree in the city, because he produced Drama by Elemental, which was a crazy independent, hip hop single from Toronto, which like blew up in Japan and like a few other places around the world. And also got a great response in the city. But sonically, that record kind of changed the way that people thought about Canadian hip hop records, because it just didn't sound like anything else. You know what I mean? It sounded so much, more advanced, right? So, and then Easy on the Motion, Ghetto Concept, records like that. So these were like, classics, right? That by the time that I met him, like he had already won like 2 Junos, you know what I mean? Like in like national Canadian music awards, right? So like, but beat digging that was his bread and butter, right? So I learned a lot from him. And then my man Moss, we clicked up, and then he is a crazy dude when it comes to the records too. So, I learned a lot from hanging out with him. But it was just going out and experimenting and trying stuff out, man. I bought so many whack records, Shom, so many whack records. And I also knew nothing about Condition, because we were hip hop guys, right? So we were just like, oh man, I got the original, the break plays, or like, whatever. It doesn't matter if this whack song has like 10 skips on it, who cares, right? And then like years later, I'm like, man, this whack song's kind of my jam. Like I like this kind of like, folksy sound. And I'm like, man, it's the same. Like, so it's that kind of stuff too. You know what I mean? Like you over time, like you start to develop better habits. But we were young kids, man, and we were really, really just excited by discovering and learning about all this stuff through records. I mean, we were looking for stuff to sample, right? That's really what we were doing. But in the process, we were falling in love with the whole other, sort of world of music.
When did you get involved with the world of radio? You were a longtime radio show host in both the college world and the commercial world.
Mhm.
Tell me about that beginning.
The radio thing, man, it was interesting. Like, I started in radio in 1994, 94, 95, which was my first year in university. But I kind of always had, it was weird. Like I used to do my own radio shows when I was a kid, like when I was like 10 years old. Like I used to actually, this is like, Shom, this is ridiculous. Like what I used to do was there would be like, whatever pop radio station would be like the top 6 at 6, with like whatever, right? And they would play whatever songs, and I didn't know how to use the equipment, my dad's equipment, to properly like tape something from the radio using the amp, and like because he didn't want me to touch anything, right? So I had my own like little like those old school tape recorders that they would have in the schools, like with the speaker and then
Yeah.
the cassette player and then the buttons, right? I would put that up to the speaker and I would tape the song, right? Like whatever song it was. And then when the host would come on, I would pause it and I would turn the volume down and I would host it myself. That was blah, blah, blah with such, you know what I mean? Peter Cetera, The Glory of Love. You know what I mean? Like whatever it was, right? Like, and then I would unpause, and then the next song would come. So I would just X out the host and make myself the host. So I don't know why I did that. I don't know. I had no clue. It wasn't like these hosts were bad or anything. I just wanted to hear myself host the show, right? And so I mean, I guess I had an instinct for that since I was a kid. Like something kind of always drew me to being on radio and talking about music and sharing music that I love. So yeah, I started in college radio like 94, 95. And also, I want to say that my musical tastes were greatly informed by college radio. So being on college radio was like almost like a prestigious, endeavor for me as a kid in first year university. It was like, man, the idea of getting my own radio show is like, yo, that's crazy. Like, that would be nuts, man. How crazy would it be to have my own radio show on campus? So I didn't know how hard it was going to be. Like, I thought like you just go in there and they just give you a show. They're like, nah, like it doesn't work like that. Right. And they want to make you write the news and like all this. I'm like, I don't want to write the weather and the news. I just want to play like Roy Ayers or something. Like, come on, man. You know what I mean? Like, yo, hook it up. And eventually, what happened was there was a guy who had a slot, you know, um, and he didn't want to do the slot anymore, and he basically, I would fill in for him from time to time, and when the slot became open, people enjoyed my fill-in so much that they offered me that show. And that show was actually the first radio show I ever had, and it was called Dusty Fingers. I named it after Diamond D's production company, which was like one of the illest names at the time. Like you're like Dusty Fingers Music, like man, that's so dope. I just remember thinking that was like the illest thing in like 91. 91 or 92. When did that album come out? I'm tripping now. I think maybe 92.
92. I think he says 92 in one of the songs.
Yeah, probably 92.
Yeah.
So, but anyway, so I had a show, and it was basically, again, that show was like creating a motivation for me to want to buy records, right? So now it's like, now I have to buy samples and old records and soul records and funk records and jazz records because I have a radio show where I have to play that stuff, right? So the radio show almost created, the need to do that. And then I also was a massive hip hop head, big, that was my bread and butter at the time, really. Like I was learning about, samples and jazz and funk and soul and all that stuff. And then, hip hop was still my bread and butter. So like underground hip hop, I participated, heavily here in the scene in in Toronto. You know what I mean? I was hosting the show. I was hosting parties. I was performing at parties and stuff like that. So I was very much like sort of in that world. And the Real Frequency was the name of the show that I eventually joined. It was started by a guy named Musically Insane, my homie Junior, big up Junior. And you know, another girl at the time named Samantha was involved as well. You know, she was a big, you know, a big part of the show as well. And, you know, they eventually had a chance to take the slot to an evening time slot, and they asked me to come on as the host. I was already doing a segment, kind of a weekly segment on there, like loaded my way onto that show, as many do to get places in life, and basically like it was a super fun show to be a part of, and I had a chance to help sort of carve out the personality of what eventually became, you know, sort of the newer version of the Real Frequency show, which eventually went to like Flow 93.5. As you said, it was, you know, eventually on a commercial radio show. Like we were like the underground show on the commercial station. So, you know, for me, that was like the goal. You know, I didn't want to be, you know, anything more than that, right? Like I never wanted to be on the air being like, and this is the latest, you know, from Justin Bieber. Like that was never my goal, right? So being able to take it that far and rep for the city in that way was really a privilege, man, you know. And I got to shout out my man DJ P Plus as well. You know, he came on after I did, you know, a few years after that, and then the three of us, Insane, P Plus, and myself, kind of carried, you know, the Real Frequency. And a shout out to my man Keezy as well, you know, who was always around as well with the exclusives. So, but that was a really really fun era, man. And that show has always connected me to Toronto hip hop in a deep way. You know, I always feel like I have this, you know, feeling to ride for the city in that way, you know, because of my attachment, you know, to that show.
I think the story you just outlined, a few dots I think are worth pointing out. Firstly, it's really cool to hear how you learned about records at that point in time. This point in time, people would learn about it obviously in a different way, right? Going from tapes to the library to collecting records, radio show. It's super cool. And I think those experiences, especially hosting, being a rapper, being an artist, and hosting the most important hip hop show in the country, you met a lot of great artists too. You interviewed them. And through all this, you're very good with people, listening to people, connecting with people, making friends with people all over the world. I think that probably helps a lot with what you do now. And I think just beat digging in general, which is heavily based on relationships too. So I think it's just something I took away from what you mentioned. And I will say, you really minimized your accomplishments as an artist. I mean, you had some great songs out there. I think it should be mentioned more. So yeah.
Thanks, man. Appreciate that.
Tell me about your relationship with the producer, Jake One, who's out of Seattle. Tell me about the origins of that connection.
Well, I mean, you know, that connection, you know, comes through, you know, my man Moss, you know, and big shouts to my man Moss, you know, producer, you know, record head, businessman, actually has his own record pressing plant called Night Kitchen Pressing, who we're pressing up some records with right now. So shameless plug for my man Moss and Night Kitchen Pressing. But Moss was you know, a friend who I'm again made sort of in first year university, and I had met Attic, you know, shortly afterwards, and then myself, Moss, and Attic all kind of connected together. And Moss had taken a trip to Seattle. It was part of a graduation present, you know, for graduating high school. And I believe the Final Four was happening in Seattle, you know, that year. And him and his dad went out there, and as part of his trip, he went to a bunch of record stores. And I'm not sure if it was something that happened on the trip. I actually think it was something that happened afterwards. But he had gotten a bunch of contacts for different record stores, and he called one of the record stores asking to mail order some records, back to Toronto, um, in Seattle. And essentially, based on the records he was asking for, the person at the store said, "Hey, I don't have this stuff. You got to talk to Jake." And like, oh, he happens to be in the store right now. Like, take Jake's number and and call him, or whatever it is. And for some reason, Jake decided to just be like, "All right, cool." And so Moss and Jake started talking, and they started connecting, and started trading records, and trading knowledge. Really, you know what I mean? And through that connection with Jake, myself and Attic, sort of through that connection with Jake that Moss had, myself and Attic connected with Jake. And then we would, back then it was the era of the three-way call, right? So like you'd get, one person would call this other person, and then another person would call another person. You know what I mean? It was like you had to get these codes and stuff back then to be able to do it, right? It wasn't like a normal thing. Um, so anyways, but just to be able to talk with people, and the lengths you would go to again share that connection, right? Like it comes back to the same insight that drives, that drove Live Convention, that drove CrateryCon, right? It's the same insight, right? It's this need for community, because again, this is such a niche thing that if you find people that are just as passionate, about this stuff in a deep way, it's a rare thing, right? So you want to be able to like, you know, um, like spend as much time with those people and make those connections as much as possible, right? So this was no different, right? So we find, we hook up with Jake, and we just happen to all be in Toronto, and Jake happens to be in Seattle. Jake has his own, connection to digging through like his OG, which is, Mr. Supreme LaRock, who's one of the goats, you know what I mean? Of the shit, right? So it's just like, yo, man, like he put us on to mad shit, we were putting him on to stuff too. And so through that exchange, Jake and I became homies, and eventually he started sending me beats, and we started working together, and we just had a natural connection, man. And it's very odd to describe, right? Because I felt I had a deeper connection in some ways musically with Jake than I even did with some of the people here that I work with. You know what I mean? And it's just like, I don't know what, it can't really explain it. It's just the way that it was. And I could say the same thing for him. Like he felt more connected to some of the stuff he was doing with me than he was with some of the other groups he might have been working with in Seattle. Right. So, yeah, it was just a natural connection, man. And we just vibed together. So yeah, we did a bunch of records together, man. The Exquisite, Super Educated, World Premiere, Essay on Pseudoism, Stripes, Prime Time. Yeah, we got a lot of records, man. About 3 singles that I did with Jake, over the years. And again, my output is pretty small, but as you said, a lot of it is produced by Jake, early Jake, early Jake one.
I'd say you got in real early with Jake One, who went on to be extremely successful as a producer, producing many, many classics. Classics on some of the biggest artists and underground artists and pop artists, basically, are big time rappers out there.
Man, I'm so proud of him, and I'm so happy for him, man. When I see him, win, it just makes me happy, man. And he's a complete fool at the same time. So it's like, I gotta just appreciate, the level of accomplishment, for how big of a fool he really is, man. It's pretty incredible, man. I gotta give him full props on that.
Yeah, he's made some of like my all-time favorite beats, especially Rock Cocaine Flow. To me personally, is like one of my favorites all time. He killed that one.
Yeah, man. Yeah, man. I used to roll up to the homies' houses like back in the days, like, I know you talked to House Shoes, recently, and one of the things that I used to do is I used to roll up to different rappers' houses in Toronto, and most of them were like friends of mine. Like I'm talking about people like Brass Monk, IRS, obviously my homie Fat Ski, but like any, like like a lot of MCs, you know what I mean, from back in the days. You know, we should just and have sessions, right? You just roll up, somebody has some beats, you know what I mean? Like, oh, let's just roll up and you know what I mean, smoke a little something and just like rap, you know what I mean? And we used to do that, you know, all the time. And I used to just, you know, roll up to, you know, places in the borough and just, you know, with like beat tapes and stuff, you know, in tow. And I would always flex on people with the Jake beat tapes, right? Because the, you know, I'd have the Jake beat tapes, but then the real flex would be House Shoes would had my, you know, giving us some Dilla beat tapes. So then like, dude, you pull out the Dilla beat tapes, everyone's like going crazy, like, yo, can I get a dub of this? Can I get blah? I'm like, yo, chill. You know what I'm saying? Like, you know what I mean? But like, dude, we used to roll up with the, you know, with the beat tapes and just hang out. And people used to just, man, and Jake's beats were great, man. You know what I mean? Even back then. And I'm sure if we listen to it now, I'm sure there's probably some cringeworthy moments that I'm sure he would more than agree on. But they were good beats, man. You know what I mean? Like even back then, there were like a lot of good ones, you know, like solid ones. Like, you know, so I got so much love for Jake, man, and just knowing how long I've known him for and to see everything he's accomplished, man, I'm super proud of him.
It's interesting about the time you're talking about. It's kind of, I don't know what the term is, handmade relationships, physical tapes where you have to play it in person. And
Analog, man. It was
yeah,
the analog.
real analog, right? Like
We were
if
living
you didn't,
analog. Now we're living in digital.
yeah, yeah. I mean, there's advantages to everything. The fact that, I mean, there's like a relationship where if people dubbed you something, you had it. And if you chose not to, they did not have it, right? So that led to you getting certain things, also led to you sharing or not sharing. I mean, you shared a lot actually. So it's just, I just think people may not relate to it the same way now. And in a way, what you described is like hyper analog and in person, but it led to a lot of the story has to do with a lot of kind of international connections. For instance, you mentioned the earlier work by Attic, who's from the Grassroots. Some of these records are very popular around the world in different pockets in Europe and specifically in Japan. Tell me about your exposure to Japan and how some of this local music, local to Toronto, is received there.
Well, I mean, the thing that, you know, about Japanese culture, is that it's, you know, it's deep, man. It's deep, bro. You know, they are like the supreme appreciators of culture, like worldwide. Like, I don't know anybody who, you know, I don't know a nation, a group of people who like deep dive into culture, whether it's sneakers, whether it's fashion, whether it's music, whether it's specific corners or pockets of music and try to understand them in the deepest way possible. And I'm not and what I mean by that is like, you know, really dig through, you know, through all of this stuff, through the genre of what you're looking at, right? And try to find, you know, like comb through it all. Like really get, you know, familiar with this shit and understand it, right? So if you're coming culturally from, you know, a place that does that anyways, when it applied to any genre, you could apply that to Canadian hip hop, right? So it's like there are going to be people there who are going to be like, oh, you know, just the same with like UK hip hop or French hip hop or whatever, right? But with Canadian hip hop, primarily because of the proximity to the US, there was a familiarity, but a slight difference in the sound that I think drew people to it. And when you think about, you know, the groups that it's not like everything from Toronto or everything from Canada is like revered over there. It's like specific types of, you know, like specific types of sound, right? And it's when you think about that mid 90s jazzy boom bap, like that kind of, you know what I mean? Like what we think about as like sort of classic 90s hip hop, like that sound that is the sound that, has lasted, right? That's the enduring sort of definition of that 90s sound. So the Canadian records that fall into that pocket, whether it's records like Grassroots, whether it's records like Citizen Kane, The Epic, whether it's records like Mathematic, Down to Earth, Sixth Sense, whether it's records like that, you know, these are the records that, have, like are the ones that endure and have endured, in places like Japan, right? And you know, there are people that, and obviously I'm leaving out like Socrates and Chaclair and all that, like that stuff as well, right? Not to, you know, not to not include those people as well, for sure, right? And their music is, I just think of them as like bigger artists, right? So, but like that stuff is, again, appreciated. They're like Chaclair and all that stuff is like, especially the early Chaclair stuff, like Just a Second and all those kind of records, What It Takes, like those are solidified as like just underground, you know, classics, like a Father Time or something like that, right? But you know, that era of Toronto hip hop, is appreciated because there's a fundamental appreciation for that era of hip hop, period. So now it's like in the same way that, we might love, I'm just gonna like let's say James Brown, right? Like James Brown, as a sound, you know, was not just James Brown, right? But there was offshoot groups. And then there was other, countries, and people that were influenced by James Brown that created their own version of that sound and influenced by it, right? There could be Thai records that sound like influenced by James Brown. There could be, British, soul records that are influenced by James Brown. Like, you know what I mean? So there's no end to the impact that one sound has. Just like, we in Toronto, like Grassroots was influenced by like Pete Rock and Tribe and, you know what I mean? De La, all that, you know what I mean? They were influenced by all that stuff. Marley Marl, like, so it's just natural for that sound to have that, you know, tie in, right? So it's the same thing with music from back in the days. There were jazz musicians in Japan who probably wanted to imitate, John Coltrane or Miles Davis or whatever it was. You know what I mean? So, and then the result is records that we now are like, oh shit, yo, well, this Japanese jazz shit is crazy. You know what I mean? Like, so, that's the whole, the cycle of it, right? Is just like the impact and the influence is so far reaching. And, culturally, Japan is just on it, man. So it just shocks me. The last time we went there, they were, they had the Grassroots album for like $300 or something like that, right? It was like something crazy. I'm like, wow, man, this is nuts. And like, it's just coveted, man. It's like a coveted record, like out there. And it's like, it's crazy, man. Like there's so many people here that don't even know that record. You know what I'm saying? But in
Yeah,
here,
I'll say, first of all, it is a really good record. It's very well produced, and it's of a certain sound where people who like beat digging will really like it. I mean, they have great taste in samples and great production overall. And yeah, I mean, for our listeners, I think it's a kind of a slept on uh, underground album globally. So it's good to see it's getting some shine in Japan.
Passes Through Time is the name of the album. The
Yeah.
Grassroots Passes Through Time, released in 1999 on Conception Records. Shout out Conception.
Concept. Oh yeah, I forgot it was on Conception Records. Also another Seattle linkage,
Yeah.
right?
Well, that came directly through Jake. Jake was, based in Seattle. Conception was a Seattle label. His homies were the ones running the label. So, you know, they heard what we were doing and they were like, yo, we want to put this out. And then same thing with Grassroots. Like they heard, the Grassroots stuff and they're like, yo, how can we, be a part of releasing this? So
Yeah, it makes sense. It makes sense. And I think you did some work with them earlier. I think there was a compilation Conception Records
Lockman
put out,
rotation. Yep.
Walkman Rotation, where I think you were on, and there's a lot of good stuff on that. A lot of
Yeah.
like,
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah,
Yep.
heavy beat digging influence all over that compilation. But it through that, maybe it's just the time, but learning through those songs and discovering some of the samples of those, it was like a early learning for me, which was very cool. Put me on some great shit.
Yeah, man. I mean, we were all learning, man. They had, so Mr. Supreme and Jake One, they had a crew together called the Con Men, and they put out, these like break tapes, which was again really popular at that time period, right? So, there was, Con and Amir had, off track or on track or off track. I want to say it's
On track. It was on
on
track.
track was their break mix series. Then you had Conman had like four tapes that were like super ill, right? Smooth Criminals on Beat Breaks was one. The Masters was another one. Veteranos was another one, and I want to say the other one was called Jealous Toys Die. um but those were they had like four mixtapes that were like fucking incredibly, like, so well put together, and it was a combination of like Supreme's crates and Jake's like DJ and production, like 4-track capabilities. So they were just well constructed tapes, man. They were really well put together, man. And um,
I completely forgot about those. I mean, you shared them with me at the time. They were insane. And there's something about that kind of short era that you said about these beat mixes that are crazy. Like you said, on track, uh, and the ones by Phil.
man, World of Beats, man.
Yeah,
World
yeah.
of Beats.
Who's one of my first guests on the show?
Those were like, like you think about. So there was Soul Man. There was also Vinyl Reanimators. They had a tape that was like, based out of Boston. Khan and Amir actually are originally from Boston, which people forget. You know what I mean? So Boston actually has a really interesting connection to beat digging culture and stuff like that as well. But I'll let Bostonites speak on that. Um, but there's the like the culture of making break tapes was like a thing, right? And certain albums that were like mythologized, like Lynn Christopher, for example, right?
Yeah.
Like I heard Lynn Christopher on the Conman tape, before Smut Peddlers used it. You know what I mean? Before it was like a thing, before somebody was like, it was on this break tape, and everybody was like, what is that? How can I use it? You know what I mean? And then eventually, actually, it came out on that Walkman rotation tape. Supreme had used it for one of his groups or something like that. But like, I remember like when we heard that, we're like, oh my God, what is
Yeah.
this? This is like ready-made shit. Like, oh my God, that shit was crazy. So like records like that, like I just will always think of the Con Men, you know what I mean, when I hear that record, because you know, that is them all day, man. And just like, cutting that out back to back on the 4-track, like, yo, man, get out of here, bro. That shit was incredible, man.
They
Incredible.
helped make. They knew these records. I mean, they made these records grails. They made them famous
100%.
in
For
a
me,
way.
anyways, I could
Yeah.
say that. Like, I didn't, that Lynn Christopher is not like, I don't own that record because of Smut Peddlers. I own that record because of the Con Men. You know what I mean? That's why I own that record, right? So anyways, like there's a lot of breaks and records, even to this day. I'll find something, you know what I mean? And it's usually not even something crazy rare, right? It's just, but at the time, it was about the knowledge. It didn't matter how rare the record was. It was about the breadth of knowledge that people had, right? And man, the knowledge was deep, bro. These guys, the knowledge was deep, man. Preem, like, he was so ahead, man. He was so ahead, man. And, he's one of the guests that we're having for, CrateryCon, shameless plug. But man, what a dude, man. Like one of the deepest in the game, man. Like there's so much, like, like, and he's just a salve, man. He's just a record salve. Like he goes hard, and he cares. He cares about music, in a deep way, right? That's why, right? So, um,
There's a there's
yeah.
a group, and I swear they had a mixtape. They're heavy beat diggers out of the UK, out of London. And I mean, interesting enough, I met the group, or at least one of the
You
guys.
talking about P Brothers?
I'm talking about the creators.
Creators, yes, yeah. That
Yeah,
that was the library era, probably. You know what I
yeah,
mean? So
yeah.
they probably had crazy library shit. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, so there was a guy named Julian.
Yeah, he's one of
Really
the best.
nice guy, right? And I visited him many times at his house in London, and I believe he went by the name Giuliano Creator, and he was playing me insane shit, insane European library. I was like, I was blown away, and I was very poor at the time, so I did buy records, but like I couldn't ball like that, right? And he was really cool. He's like, "Oh man, it's not about that, right? Like, let's just vibe out." And I went there like 3, 4 times in this period of a few months. This guy's the nicest guy, and he had crazy shit. And I mean, I believe that guy individually played a big role in popularizing a lot of those European records and
Totally.
sharing them, right, in the US. Because he had all these relationships with producers that we all love, right? And
Hmm.
he's telling me stories about how they bought shit from him and now it's in the US. I think that stuff is so cool. I would love to track down that guy. I mean, it's an amazing guy.
I think he's around. I mean, I never met him personally, but I am familiar with sort of, you know, some of his contributions, based on exactly what you're talking about. Just again, word of mouth. People again, people like Supreme, people like Jake. These are people that had access to Julian back then. So I heard about him through guys like that, man. But yeah, that whole world is crazy, man. The beat world back then, it was so competitive, you know what I mean? Because of like, everybody wanted to like have the newest, sample or drum or whatever, you know what I mean? Like whatever it was, right? And the culture was so it was so sort of rooted in that, back then, which is just it's crazy to think, and now we got AI samples, man. It's like a wild world out there, bro. It's fucking crazy. I'm not even shitting on that. You know what I mean? I'm just saying it's crazy, right? Like stems and being able to like isolate drums and, you know, certain instruments. Like, dude, we fantasized about that shit, when we were like, man, I wish I could just take the bass line out and keep the drums. You know what I mean? Like, it's just like, dude, you would just wish for that. It wasn't a reality, right? So the everything is a beat now, like that's the world that we're living in. Like everything's a beat, it's overwhelming in some ways, right? Like, you know, the choice and options and all that stuff can be debilitating. It's just like, you ever try to order food and, you look at the app and you can't decide because there's just too many options. If there was 3 options, you'd be better. But you got 35 options and you're like, fuck, I don't know. Do I want Thai? I never even thought about having a sub. Do I want that? Do I want a
I
veal sandwich?
I think
I
you
don't know.
described the world of so many things, beat digging and life and art now, and maybe it could make things better. I don't know if it has yet. Like you said, there's a downside to having limitless options.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I'm not a person that gets excited by that. You know what I mean? I'm a person that probably, feel feels pressured by that, in some way. It's just like it's just too much. It's too much, man. Like, so, anyways, that's my take on that. But
Yeah, I think, there's so many stories we can go into, but I think it's really impressive how you've flown through like different eras as a rapper, as an artist, then moving into digging for beats, radio show host. I mean, a radio show host went on for a very long time, and now you're doing something new with CrateryCon. I think it's impressive that you keep flowing into new shit and making it exciting. You don't stay stuck on one thing. So I think that's really great.
no, I mean, and Shom, I for a long time I was stuck. You know what I mean? And I mean, maybe not in the way that I think, I was back then, but I felt like I didn't have, agency over you know, my own creativity. I thought creativity was something that I used to think creativity was something that comes to you and leaves you when it's like when it appears, it's like a, lightning in a bottle. You got to seize it. you know, you got to write that rap, you got to, you know what I mean? Like, do, you know, like whatever it is, like that creative motivation, you know? And once I stopped having a career, I mean, once I stopped sort of chasing the rap dream and I started to have a career, and I took a job, you know, working in advertising, you know, as a copywriter, and eventually became a creative director, worked my way up to creative director over, you know, like a very long period of time. Once I did that, what happened was I was coming up with ideas for my job. So creativity, you know, was no longer sort of, you know, this airy fairy thing that just visited me when it felt like it. Like creativity was a discipline. I got up every day and I did it. You know, it was like you just come up with ideas. You just think. Who cares if it's shit? 95% of it is shit. Your job is to like find the one that isn't shit. You know what I mean? And then just like keep going and like recognize that you are going to generate tons and tons and tons and tons and tons of shit, you know, but then you have to be able to, your taste and your palate has to be able to develop and then recognize, hey, you know, this, this is good, this bad, this isn't bad, this is whatever, this is interesting. Not even good or bad. Is this interesting? Is this worth pursuing? Is this worth diving a bit deeper into? Right. So, you know, in doing that, creativity became a practice and a discipline and not sort of, you know, like this kind of flighty, I had a very flighty relationship with creativity. It was about, why aren't you, you know, why aren't you knocking this song out, AR? You know, I was like, oh man, you know, I'm just not feeling the vibes right now. You know what I mean? Like that's what it was. That's how I treated it. There wasn't an option to feel the vibes with work. Right. So I think over time, Shom, what's happened is, you know, the discipline of just having to be creative all the time and come up with stuff. You're generating so much stuff also that you actually like that you can't make, right? Because you're trying to sell it to a client or whatever who isn't going to always buy into what your vision is. So that makes the desire to want to execute other things that are near and dear to you even greater. You know what I mean? Because you're like, I have all this like creative expression that I want to now get out. You know, I want it's going to manifest itself into different ways. One of them is the convention, right? So, but like even the idea of a drum break clash, right? Like we talked about earlier, that's an idea that it's like, I'll never be able to execute that idea in any kind of working environment, you know? So I have to create that, you know, space for that to exist, right? So that's where the creativity comes from, right? It's like creating and being a part of a space fundamentally that I want to be a part of and cultivate, right? It's like the same thing with the underground hip hop thing, right? It was just like I wanted to be around that space all the time. It was just what I was into, it was what was naturally interesting to me, right? And so through that, I got into the radio and did all thing, and everything kind of just dominoed and informed itself, right? So I think it's just being open to trying new things, and over the time of trying all of these different creative things, every time I feel like doing something new is just open the door to try something new. And, you know, recently doing the convention, I think that also opened up a whole new chamber, right? You know, now there's this kind of like entrepreneurial side of like, oh shit, you know, it's like, well, what can't we do? You know what I mean? Like I have a record label, you know, with Jake One called General Principle. You know, it's just like, well, why not? Let's just do a label. You know what I mean? So it's just like whatever we want to do, like we should just do it. You know what I mean? That's kind of like where I'm at. It's taken me a long time to get there. A lot of experience, a lot of like going through the motions. Um, but that's kind of where I'm at right now in life. You know, if I feel like this thing needs to exist, it's like, let's just make it, you know, let's figure out a way for it to exist. you
I
know,
think that's amazing. I think our audience or anyone really could benefit from that. You described, I would imagine, ups and downs, things that at the time might have felt like an L. Think of how many rappers who didn't make a 30-year career out of it, which is almost all rappers. They don't always find another wave to make them successful in a new way. And that could be for a rapper, that could be for anything. That could be getting fired from a job or not getting into a class or whatever the hell. But to be able to keep rolling and then manifest something new that is in your kind of taste and in your mentality, that's the fucking game of life. And I read a book. I'm trying to remember the book. There's a aging population in Japan, and there's certain regions where there are no young people, and there's almost everyone there is like over 60 or 70, and they have a whole economy that's around aging. And there's a theater group that started that it's everyone is over 70, and there are people who acted as kids, or there are people who started acting post 70, and it became their whole life, and it began to travel around the world. And it shows that, hey, they invented something for a new phase. Like that, I think that mentality can benefit anyone, like that kind of lesson, right? And I try to keep that. I mean, everyone has their kind of phases, and I want to like keep that optimism to turn into something new.
For sure, man. For sure. I mean, that's that to me, that's the dream. You know what I mean? Like, that the dream is to create things, on my own terms. That's the dream, man. That's what I want to be able to do, with my life. So that's what I'm trying to move forward towards, man. And doing more projects like that are going to be the things that, I think carry and fulfill me creatively and just life wise, man. It's just like telling these stories. Like, I love music, man. I really do. And I think being able to have the privilege to be in the proximity of, some of my heroes and be able to shed light on their contributions and their stories. Like, why wouldn't I do that? Why wouldn't I want to be a part of that? And so, it's just the key is to do it in an interesting way. I think that's the thing, right? So now when we look at these things, it's like you're coming to hear a story, but you're hearing it told in a way you've never heard before, right? So that's what makes it interesting. That's what makes it creative.
Yeah. Yeah. I think it's unbelievable some of the stories that you've uncovered through the artists who were there, who made it. Yeah, like I said, the dots that are connected, it's because you're good with people. So it gives you this kind of way to relate to producers and rappers that maybe makes it comfortable for them to talk that way. And so much that you could ask insightful questions that most people are not going to be able to do.
Well, thank you, man. Thank you, man.
Let's play a word association game. Tell me what comes to mind for these songs. It could be a feeling, a personal experience, where you were in your life or how you absorbed this music, an anecdote, really anything. Swiss Jaguar, Morning Sunrise.
Swish Jaguar, man. Big shout out to the homie Swish, man. So Swish Jaguar, Morning Sunrise. So that song is, a song that was released on my collective label with Jake One, General Principle Records, a couple years ago. It was our very first release. And that record came about because Swish, who is a talented, musician, producer, songwriter, composer, very, very, musical cat, originally from Seattle, lives in LA now, but does a lot of production work, under another name, and decided to sort of take on this vocoder inspired cover of, the Don Blackman penned Weldon Irvine classic, Morning Sunrise, which was actually originally recorded for Lenny White, 29 featuring Lenny White. And they put out the OG, sort of version of that. And, that song is just such a beautiful song, but then to kind of like, reggae-fy it, with the vocoder was just so ill. Right. And so, he had sent this to Jake kind of almost as a joke. Right. I mean, I think he liked it, but he wasn't really sure what to do with it, right? Or didn't really know what to think of it, you know? And when he gave it to Jake, Jake was like so moved by it that he basically wanted to create a label just, you know, to put this record out, right? And so he called me, and a fun fact about Jake is because of the, and this goes back even before the advertising connection, but I've always had a thing with names and coming up with names for things and branding things, and just without even knowing that that's what I was doing. So he had a company, well, he has a company called Snare Jordan, right? Which is where he sells all his beat kits and stuff like that. So I came up with the name Snare Jordan, right? We were in Vancouver waiting for lunch, waiting in line to have lunch at this very popular breakfast place called Cafe Medina. And I had written some kind of jokey bars, crate related, bars, which was actually kind of an inside joke that, we all shared as homies. We would always come up with these outlandish, crate related punchlines. And so I had this line or something that I was just trying to entertain him while we were, killing time in line. And I had a line that was something about, something about stay Horton, drum champion, call me Snare Jordan, something like that, right? And he was just like, "Oh man, that's so dope, man, Snare Jordan, man. Oh man, yo, I'm gonna use that, man. I'm gonna come, I'm gonna use it." I didn't realize he was gonna use it to create a whole company and shit, right? So years later, I'm just like, man, everything's Snare Jordan, like Snare Jordan Publishing, like fucking, like everything's just has every hashtag is fucking Snare Jordan. I'm like, God damn it, Jake. You know what I mean? Like, so anyway, so when he comes to do the record label, he's like, yo, AR, I need a name. So instead of me just giving him the name, it was like, yo, why don't we partner on this? Let me handle the marketing side. Work with the artists, figure out the music stuff and, whatever. And he was like, bet, sounds like a plan. And, then we came up with, sort of general principle records, which is, again, it's really slang that Jake put me up on because it's like some West Coast shit. I think it might have even originated in Oakland. I can't be 100% sure about that. But this notion of like on GP, on general principle, like when you do something on GP, or you're gonna buy that on GP, or when you see that person, it's on site on GP. You know what I mean? Like it's just slang, right? So because he used to say that all the time, like, man, I gotta cop that on GP. I was like, yo, like that should be our label, general principle, because then it's like, yo, you cop it on GP, like cop it on our label. And so he loved it. He was like, perfect, this is it, man, this is what we're gonna do. And Swish was the first artist that we put out. And then that record sold out, like I want to say in like 2 weeks. We made like 500 of them, and they were gone. Like it was like maybe a bit longer, maybe like 3 weeks or something like that. But like they went fast. And since then, Swish has put out like a couple records in Japan. He's put out another 45 with us, which is a cover of Bobby Humphrey's "My Little Girl" with the song called "Darker Side of Love" on the other side. And I'm proud to say that even though it's taking a long time, we're nearing the completion of a re-release of Morning Sunrise with a special dub version on the B-side, which will be a Disc Union exclusive release in Japan. So, fingers crossed we can get that out there, sooner than later, maybe by the end of the year. But Moss, yo, where are my records at? Let's go, man. I need them joints. You know what I mean? So, but Swish is a talented cat, man, and he also goes by Sam Wish, and he's done a lot of amazing music, and really talented cat who I have a lot of time for, and is a big Cratery fan. I used to do a Cratery. When we talk about CrateryCon, Cratery itself was a podcast. Well, not it was. It's funny to call it. It's really more. Sirius likes to call it a dig diary, but myself, K Wonder, DJ Sirius, for many years we recorded these kind of hangout sessions where we would just all play records, and the whole vibe was just the vibe match. Like you got to play something that matches the vibe of what the person played before you, and those Cratery sessions, which you can still listen to on Cratery.com, you know, those a lot of people like Sam, like Swish, they've come to me and been like, dude, this is like I learn from these, man. Like I listen to these things and I've like learned about music. I've learned about artists. I've taken deep dives on, certain songs because of, Cratery and you guys sharing your music. So to me, that was like, that makes it worth it, man. That when you're doing all this stuff, like and just sharing music from your personal collection, just taking the time to put it out there for people and, there isn't, and, there's no financial gain, right? So, the hope is that sharing it is enriching someone's life in some way, which it is. So that makes me happy.
Yeah, it's very generous.
Yeah, man.
Yeah. Another song, Caesar Frazier, 75 album, Funk It Down.
Man, DJ Premier, man. That's what I think about right there, man. Again, another con man, kind of like, con man vibe where again, these breaks, if unless you were in New York City and you were of a certain ilk and moving in a certain production circle, you maybe wouldn't have access to this kind of knowledge, right? But Caesar Frazier, Funk It Down, that was used, for me anyways, my most, famous uh, reference for that is X Girl to the Next Girl by Gangstar, which is on the Daily Operation album, second single from the album. Great track. And it's that like horn breakdown that comes in sort of like, a few minutes into the track. But Primo also uses, I want to say, uses the top piece in another Gangstar song as well. But like Caesar Frazier 75, I remember I found that at a record store called it used to be called Century Records in the East End. Now it's called Beach Sound Records. And this dude, for some, inexplicable reason, doesn't price his records with like regular price tags. You have to open the record and, on the inside of the record, there's dots. And you're like, each one of these dots represents like $5. So you're like, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 dots. That's 20. This is a $25 record, right? But you're like, why not just put 25? Why do you have to have dots on the
Also,
inside?
someone could just add a dot. I mean,
Also, you're writing on the inside of the fucking record.
yeah,
Dude.
that's
Like, what are you doing? You know what I mean? So, like, it's literally like there's pen on the inside of the record now, right? So it's like, but I couldn't understand this like dot system. You know what I mean? I was like, why? I was like, is it just so that he can increase the price like easily afterwards, like add more dots? I'm like, I couldn't understand it. So, anyways, I pulled this Caesar Frazier out, and I think whatever it was, it had 5 dots. I was like, $25. I'm like, I could pay that for Caesar Frazier, and
a grail. It's a grail for sure.
so I bought it, and but that was like not even in the 90s. Like I found that in the 2000s. I never, I couldn't find that record, when it was really popular. That happens all the time, right? Because there's a fervor for this stuff, and then everybody wants it, and then, you still keep wanting it because you're a nerd and you're like, lust for this record was never going to go away. So you're like, I still need it. Like 15 years later, you're like, all right,
Yeah.
off the list. You know what I mean? So it was one of those, but yeah, Caesar Frazier, Funk It Down.
Okay. Stark Reality. Stark Reality discovers Hoagie Carmichael's music shop, Comrades.
Comrades. I'm going to go back to Con Men, on this one, because that was the first time I ever heard that song. And, through the Con Men and through listening to those mixtapes is how I started to like learn about those kind of graily records, right? And around the same time I learned about like Moody, The Gentle Rain, and records like that, right? So like Stark Reality, like, to me that was a record that was like just I was never going to have that record, like there's just no way that I was ever going to have that record. I just kind of resigned myself to it, and it's just a record that sounds rare. Like it's so psychedelic and jazzy and has that sound, the deep bass lines and like the fuzz guitar and also the weird ass singing. Like it's just like a children's record, that's psychedelic, right? So it's just it from a novelty perspective, a uniqueness perspective, it was like, man, I'm never gonna get this record. And then oh, I want to say I did end up getting it. Should be around here somewhere. There we go. Stark Reality, you know.
That's Grail for real. That's
Real
Grail
for real,
for real.
But I mean, it took a time, Again, I found it, I got it in the 2000s, and I had to pay for it. I wasn't like, oh man, I found it in a, like a $2 bin or something like that, right? Which, I would love to say that I did, but I didn't. I'm not going to front like I did. That's not, you know what I mean? I can't do that. It's just not. I can't do that. I'm not that guy. You know what I mean? But it's a great record, man. I love that record, and to me it's that quintessential era of digging mid 90s, like, these were like the grails of that era that they're still grails today. I mean, Stark Reality is like, probably over $1,500 now to buy that record, in person, in real life, you know, if it was of a decent condition, I would say at least that, right? So it's not a joke out there,
Yeah.
for these
It's
records.
not a joke at all. One of my first episodes of this podcast was about Stark Reality. So you played it for me for the first time. It was an amazing experience. I remember I was at your crib, we were drinking whiskey, and I was reading the liner notes and listening to this insane record. And I was like, this is the best shit in the world. This is the best. So, I mean, I can't tell you how much I enjoy that record. Appreciate that.
Well, I mean, it's crazy, man. And each of these things has its own origin stories too, right? Like, the mythology of Stark Reality and how that even came to be a thing, right? It's there's just, yeah, I encourage people to go out there and you know what? I will say this, what I love about, reissues that you don't get on the original albums is context, right? Like when you get a great reissue and it gives you the story of the album and it tells you, about the creation of the album, its reception, its release, the musicians, you know what I mean? Like to me, there's real value in that, right? And in being able to tell those stories, right? So oftentimes, uh, we kind of turn our nose up at, reissues and that kind of stuff, but listen, man, these things are great tools for DJs, and they're also great tools for knowledge, man, and sharing information. And so, that being said, I don't really buy reissues, but uh, you know,
I find it to
just
be the funniest after saying you have this, $1,000 plus record. Yeah, I know. I
I
hear
mean,
you.
I don't. I mean, I just don't. And I basically like it came. You know what, Shom? Like, so when I first started to learn from Attic, when I went to his house, one of the things that blew me away was that his collection was pretty much mostly like, I would say like 90 to 95% from what I could ascertain, original pressings, like, of albums, right? And so when you're seeing like all these originals for like Tribe and Pete Rock and all this stuff, and it's all the original pressings, and you're like, holy shit, you know what I mean? And I'm like, I got my compilations from Play D and stuff that I bought, and my tapes from the public library. I'm like, I'm looking like a scrub out here, you know what I mean? Like, it wasn't like fun, you know what I mean? It was like, but it wasn't necessarily like bad. It was just inspirational to see somebody like Attic, like, yo, like this is how it should be. This is what my shit should look like. You know what I mean? Like that's how I took it, right? So, and not that, Attic's some elitist guy or anything like that. That's just what he did. That's just how, he thought, Large Pro and Pete Rock and Q-Tip did it. So that's how he wanted to do it. You know what I mean? And so, it's not a difficult, thing to understand, right? And what's crazy is that, when we met Jake, he was kind of like living by the same rules, right? So that's again that sort of mutual, shared like approach to digging, not just the types of records, right? It's like, yo, like, we all are digging in the same way. We're looking for originals. We want to find drum brace. We want to find like with weird loops and things that we can chop. You know what I mean? Like sound records and you know how it was, dude. You buy a record for fucking like embellishment sounds and shit like that. You know what I mean? Like all kinds of shit, right? So, you know, like anyways, that's I forgot where do we even start with this, Sean? What was the prompt for this?
Tangents are the key
All
to this
right, so
whole
it doesn't
project.
matter. What like whatever. You know what I mean? It is what it is. Stark
Uh,
reality.
Mad skills, extra abstract skills, featuring Large Professor and Q-Tip.
About to cook up a loaf of bread on your motherfucking head. You know what I mean?
The best.
Extra P, bro. Like Large Pro is one of my favorite people in hip hop. Like, period. Period. Like, just as a person that exists in hip hop, like just how hip hop he is as a person, like just the uncompromising hip hopness of Large Pro. I, dude, everybody always talks about Large Pro production, this, that. Yo, I love Large Pro as a rapper. You know what I mean? And it's for moments like that, you know what I mean? Like that are just like so ill, but so comical, but so just raw at the same time. You know what I mean? Like, you know, about to bring him out. I love that record, man. I love that record. And he produced it, I want to say too. And there's a crazy Carla Bley flip that he does on that. But yo, what a jam, man. That's like one of my, you know, I have like I have a playlist that I made for myself called Rolling Deep, and it has like, you know, my favorite, some of my favorite like posse cuts, and that's always in there, man. Extra abstract skills, man. It's one of my favorites. I love that joint.
Yeah, yeah. I find it wild that you affiliate with some of these legends that are, when you're growing up, these people are like giants and you're interacting with them through all the work you do. So I think it's pretty fucking crazy.
Oh, it's the best, man. It's the best, man. I mean, you know, like just to like pick Large Pro's head about like drum breaks and shit like that, and just like, you know what I mean? Like, yo, just it's just the best. It's just the best shit. You know, it's like just satisfies your, you know, your 14-year-old nerd brain to the highest possible capacity.
Yeah, it's pretty cool. Craig Mack, Get Down, Q-Tip remix.
Soft Machine,
Ooh, I didn't know that. Dude, you're
yeah,
putting me on. I gotta look that up.
Soft Machine, man. That's what I think about. You know, again, to take it to a digging level. I mean, you know, like my first impulse, right? Like when you said that was like Soft Machine, and I think again that goes to the ear, right, of Q-Tip. You know what I mean? And one of the things that was interesting because I talked to Large Pro about this recently, and and the idea that Q-Tip has probably created the most like kind of hype beast type records from a digging perspective. You know what I mean? Like the shit that he utilized became coveted by people in crazy ways, whether we're talking about like Billy Brooks, whether we're talking about Ramp, whether we're talking about Heath Brothers, you know what I mean? And so Soft Machine, specifically Soft Machine Third, I'm trying to remember if Pete Rock brought it out first on the Jamal Fades Them All remix or whether or not it was Tip on the Get Down remix. But I want to say, I think it might have been Tip because I think Get Down is like 94. And I think Jamal might be like 95 or 96. But again, like, you know, progressive rock band out of the UK, Hugh Hopper, you know, like, they're like Soft Machine Third, man. It's just a ethereal, sick prog record. Like, that's just, yo, man, like, again, the fact that one of your heroes, Q-Tip, is telling you this shit is cool. This is what I'm listening to. This is what I'm fucking with. This is what I'm making my beats from. It makes you want to open your ear and be like, yo, what's up with this shit? You know, then it's like, yo, like, does every Soft Machine record sound like this? Then you go down a Soft Machine wormhole and you start looking at that stuff. Then you're like, oh, this is like a British progressive rock band. What other British progressive rock stuff do I not know about? You know what I mean? And there's tons of amazing British prog rock that's out there, right? So, you know, again, this is why I love hip hop so much, because you know the use of samples and really someone's ear, somebody like a Q-Tip. And that record, what's crazy about that record is, dude, that's a vast record. Like it's one of those records, it's a double album, and there's like literally one song per side. So it's like 4 tracks. So you're listening to these like 13-minute songs to find like a 2-second passage that you're going to then use for a Craig Mack remix. That then I'm going to go and buy the Soft Machine album because I heard you know what I mean? Like, it's so crazy. Like the what we do, you know what I mean? Like in hip hop, like you put this record on, who knows what the process has been, whether he was needle dropping, whether he just let it play. But, when you think about these records, right, they're like, there's an art to like listening to them, to finding stuff again. And it's all about your ear. What you might hear might not be the thing that another person hears, right? But those earwormy little bits, people who have an instinct for them, are the goats of our world. You know what I mean? And Tip, prove that with that Get Down remix. You know what I mean? It's one of the best.
A couple of reactions to what you said. Firstly, I didn't know Soft Machine was a sample. I mean, I have that record and it's an end-to-end banger. Like, I mean, you could listen to, you just put them on and the whole thing is a vibe. And I'll have to listen for that sample. And I think that era of Q-Tip, he was in like a really high state of production. I mean, he has a long career with many highs. He is a certain zone when he is working with Mobb Deep, when he's working with Craig Mack, a lot of just kind of remixes for sometimes artists that you wouldn't associate with the native tongues or tribe, and he made some amazing shit. He was really in his bag at that time.
Yeah, man. One of the, like when I think about the real innovators of digging of that time period, for me, the Holy Trinity is, like Pete Rock, Q-Tip, Large Pro, right? Like there are people that come, off that branch, whether it's, DITC, whether it's, and to be fair, Diamond had his own pedigree, alongside, all of the people that I just mentioned. But, I would put people like Buck and stuff as more as like, like disciples under these guys that were learning from them, right? And Beat Miners, same thing, right? Like, and I only know this through conversations that I've had with them where, they have told me personally, like, yo, like everything was like Q-Tip and Large Pro, like what they're doing, we want to be like that. You know what I mean? And Pete Rock, right? So those were the three. So when you think about those three specifically, and I'm not discrediting Premier, Marley, any of these people, like, but like from the culture of digging, like for records and like record culture, not just sampling and production culture, but record culture. I would say that those three are the ones that really defined like the records that we lusted after, you know what I mean? And wanted to have in our collection, not just for the samples, but for the music, the musicality of the albums themselves, right? Like The Awakening, Ahmad Jamal. I love that album. Dude, Pete Rock. I listen to that album. I go for a morning walk, you know what I mean? And I will frequently on my morning walk, like if I don't want to take too long to decide what I want to listen to, put on The Awakening, Ahmad Jamal. You know what I mean? It's such a great album. It's a beautiful album, you know? And what I love about jazz trio, there's nothing to hide. You got a drummer, bassist, piano. That's it. Nothing extraneous. There's something about the basics, the fundamentals, a bass and a drum and a piano. Like, if you can make that work and evoke that much emotion, that's such a powerful thing, man. With so little, to be able to do so much with so little.
You mentioned the branches of that kind of holy trinity. The Circle, The Visit from the album She Was Here in
Mhm.
1967. What does that bring up for you?
Um, Man, when I think about that, obviously I think about Dilla, and when I think about Dilla, I think about, the GOAT. You know what I mean? Like, for me, he's the best hip hop producer of our generation, right? In terms of soulfulness, technicality, prolificness, all of that stuff, right? That's a personal preference, right? I'm never gonna say like I'm never gonna say, Pete Rock or DJ Premier or someone like that is the wrong answer, right? Or Timberland or Dr. Dre or whatever. Like, dude, like I'm never gonna say that's the wrong answer. But for me, Dilla is the GOAT. The things that he learned and applied from Q-Tip, Large Pro, Eric Sermon even, you know what I mean? Another sort of inspiration of, I think, of Dilla's that people don't really, mention as much. But to me, he was always like Pete Rock, Q-Tip, and Eric Sermon. You know what I mean? Like that was, the Dilla ingredients. You know what I mean? And but so when I think of the circle, I think of, again, the ingenuity of Jay Dilla. Because, again, listening to that record, it's a beautiful song. It's a great song. But again, I wouldn't know that song. I wouldn't have discovered that song if it wasn't for, Dilla Dog, man. So, his use of it on the Tribe album, Beats, Rhymes, and Life.
Get a Hold was the song for
Get
our
a Hold.
yeah.
Yep. Get a Hold was the song. It's one of the things I talked about with author Dan Charnas, who wrote the book Dilla Time. We had a chance to sit down a few years ago and have a conversation, when the book was released, and, we did it in front of an audience here in Toronto. And those that know me know that I'm a huge Dilla head, and a person that was, at the leading edge, I would say, of pushing Dilla's music in Toronto and bringing it to a wider audience. So, I felt attached to it and a closeness to it because I was a champion for his music in the city in a lot of ways. So I remember talking to Dan about this record, Get a Hold, and one of the tenets of Dilla Time is deceleration, meaning one of the things that he did frequently as a tool was to slow music down. And that was a way of bringing, an offness, because what it would do is it would accentuate the flaws, that, the musicians were playing with when you slowed everything all the way down. So when you sort of begin to like put a drum against it, now the way that this bass sits and rolls and the way these voices feel, there's a drunkenness to them because of the deceleration and the way that they sit on the drums, and that gives it that, not ability, you know what I mean? And I think that Dilla just created that sense of time, through using these kind of tools and using records like that, in a way that, people were slowing records down, but people weren't doing it in the way that he was doing it and applying the right, sort of sounds to match, right? And giving it that sense of its own time feel, right? So that to me, so when I think of that record, I think of one of the tenets of Dilla Time, which is deceleration.
It's an incredible flip. And when you hear the original, it's a beautiful song. And you can't believe that he took that and made Get a Hold. And I think the way you phrased it, referencing the book Dilla Time, I think it's really great. It seems like every episode I'm talking about Dilla on this. I gotta like widen my topic, but let's just say I think our fans like that kind of thing. You've played me this record before. Suzuki, Cat.
Yeah, Hiroshi Suzuki, the Cat.
My bad.
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
a Japanese jazz record, and it's kind of it's definitely considered like sort of a Japanese jazz grail at this point. But it's a beautiful record. Hiroshi Suzuki is a trombonist, and a lot of the people that played on this, I'm going to actually I got to make sure that I'm saying this name right, so I'm gonna look it up because I don't want to butcher it.
Take your time.
Um, okay, Akira Ishikawa.
Okay.
Okay, in the Count and his Count Buffaloes. So a lot of the members of that band are playing in this, you know, Hiroshi Suzuki uh, outfit on the particular on this session called the Cat, and Ishikawa's output in Japan was prolific, right? And he is again sort of regarded as, you know, one of the primary proponents of like that funky jazz rock sound that sort of carries over into a lot of different albums of that time period in Japan. But this group of players that are on this album, it's just such a beautiful record, end to end, right? And it's one of those records again that, like, you know, the whole record, there's 5 songs on the album, and the whole record is just a beautiful listen from front to back. You know, the opening track called Shrimp Dance was amazing, and then the closing track, which is called Romance, is probably the best known track on the album. J. Cole flipped it for like a Tribe remix, but that's not really like the highlight of it per se. It's just itself is like a beautiful track. And, you know, when you think about people discovering this track, you know, probably primarily in the 2000s. I
Right.
don't know if there's some, you know, Japanese hip hop artist that sampled it. Maybe they could have used it and given it some popularity in Japan that made it a collectible record prior to that. But I did not know about this record, and I think a lot of heads didn't really know about this record until well into the, you know, 2010s. You know what I mean? So this is Japanese jazz has, like, you know, like gospel music and like, you know, electronic library music, you know, things like that are more trendy now to collect. Lovers rock, reggae, you know what I mean? Like, so it just so happens that Japanese jazz is having a moment right now, and it rightfully so. There's some amazing musicians. And that Hiroshi Suzuki album, The Cat, is kind of regarded as one of the grails, you know, of that particular period and of that genre.
It's a fantastic trend in this world. You're right. It's having a Japanese jazz having a moment. It's amazing. And that shows the power of reissues, the powers of, I mean, digital and streaming. This is a case where it's popularizing music I never heard before, right?
Yeah, no, it's great.
It's
It's great.
amazing. It's
Yeah,
amazing.
praise be to the algorithm, you know, for that. You know what I
Right.
mean?
Right.
You know, because that's great. You know, that people are learning to discover new music in that way. And if you can train your algorithm to feed you, you know, great shit like that, you know, amazing. You know, good on you, man. You know, it's a great album.
Yeah.
Another morning walk go
Yeah.
to. You know what I mean?
That record also I learned through the algorithm, and of course you have it. And then Rio Fukai.
Yeah, real. Yeah. I don't
Yeah.
know how to pronounce the last
I
name, but
always
yeah,
pronounce it
scenery.
wrong. Fukai, I believe. I did a podcast on this whole like scenery album, and I discovered both of those. I mean, relatively recently. I mean, in the past few years, through the algorithm, and those are tremendously popular digital songs. I mean, you can hear them in coffee shops. That's how popular they are.
Yeah. I mean, this is all stuff that's kind of on those, you know, has infiltrated its way into those, you know, playlist culture and stuff like that too, right? And now we got all these live streams with the DJs and the plants. You know, there's so many plants. You know, there was never really plants around any kind of DJ shit. There's a lot of plants now. There's plants everywhere, bro. A lot of plants. You know,
Fam, I think it's interesting, right? Because it's like plants, nice lighting, lamps, like listening bars, borrowing from Japan again. This is we're in an era of where like a good friend of mine called it fancy boy digging. Because digging is really a dirty business. It's dusty fingers. You're putting, you know, going through all this shit. But now it's elevated. And actually, I think that's amazing because more people can enjoy it. You could enjoy it in a different way. My perfect vision of life is listening either in a bar or in someone's home, listening to my favorite music, having a drink. This is like the pinnacle of life vision to me.
I mean, listen, I love that. I love that too, man. And, like sharing and listening to music with friends is pretty much my favorite thing to do, right? Like it's just, you know, like the amount of people that have just come down here to this basement, hung out, listened to records, and like everyone just, you know, like you can just tell like we're all the same, in that moment. It doesn't matter, who you are, what kind, like your pedigree as a producer, your collector, whatever, you know what I mean? When you're just downstairs and you're listening to music and you're listening to records with your friends, like, yo, check this out. You know about this? Yo, you got this? Have you heard about this? Yo, I just found a copy of this, man. Check this out. You know what I mean? It's like the culture of sharing and putting your friends and and loved ones onto music that is meaningful to you is so great, man. It's just the best. It's the best feeling, right? So to me, that's why I still do this. Like it's really that, right? Like that's the fulfillment, right? Is being able to, share space with like-minded people and talk about the same shit that you love.
Doing it with CrateryCon at scale is fantastic. It's a good thing that you're doing. One last item I'll bring up: the documentaries Deep Crates 1 and
Hmm.
2. What does that bring up for you?
So, when I think about deep crates, I actually think about the creator of deep crates, which is a guy named Jeremy Weisfeld, aka Beat Dog. And, you know, Beat Dog is sort of, one of the unsung OGs of Canadian digging, right? So remember way back at the beginning of this conversation, I don't know if this is going to make it to the edit, but 94, 95, I started, in college radio, York University, a university that's a little bit in sort of the northern side of the city. And that's to say that, the radio station itself didn't have a huge signal. So it wasn't as sort of far reaching as some of the downtown radio stations like 88.1 and 89.5. And so by going there, I discovered, that there was all these like off the beaten path shows that people didn't, like weren't really up on. And one of them was a show called Soul by the Pound. And Soul by the Pound was Beat Dog's show. And Beat Dog used to play like the most incredible shit at that time, Sean. It was like 95, right? 95, 96, around that time. He was playing like, Nightlighters records and Lou Courtney and Leroy Hudson and you know what I mean? Like all these like, Freddie McCoy and like all these like 90s, Eddie Sine, like just like 90s staple kind of joints, Lou Donaldson and different soulful 45s and stuff like that too, right? Funky 45s. And I was just blown away, man. I was like, this exists again, like, and what I started to do was because I think somebody had recommended the show to me on campus, like maybe even at the radio station. It's like, oh, you like this kind of stuff, you should check out this guy's show, right? And once I did, I was like, holy shit, I was like a pest calling that station all the time. You know what I mean? And and Beat Dog was gracious enough to like, tell me titles and, put me up on game and stuff. And when I started to, attend York, one of the things that I did was show up at the show, right? And actually at Beat Dog show is where I met Mr. Attic, right? Because Attic and Beat Dog were friends, right? That's where I met DJ Nav. DJ Nav used to guest on that show from time to time. So, I met Nav there. So there's a bunch of people that I connected with very early through Beat Dog show. And, you know, Jeremy just, for some reason, people don't really bring him up, but he is the guy. Like when you think about deep crates, and again, you're talking about a guy from Canada who went to the US and interviewed, you know, people about producers, about record digging, and again, diving into that culture in a more meaningful way. You know, he was the first to do that, you know what I mean? And did 2 volumes of it, right? And financed it himself, put it out. And then on top of that, Attic doing all the music for it was pretty cool too, right? Just as a little bonus, right? So I just always had a lot of respect for Jeremy for being like so, you know, dedicated out the gate, you know, to doing that stuff. And then he also, you know, Beat Dog also had the Cops and Robbers um library mixes that he did and stuff. He was really early with the library stuff, you know, from a Canadian perspective as well. So he's one of the, you know, people from up here that deserves a lot of credit in spreading, you know, sort of the advent of library music and library culture as well. But just a deep cat, man, you know, and still to this day, like finds records, comes up with stuff, and no, shout out to Beat Dog, man.
Those are incredible documentaries. And I got them when they came out and watched them all the time. I was like taking notes watching this shit. And it had all the best producers. And it wasn't until recently I realized that that was Jeremy, who I also knew back then. And I was like, holy shit, same guy. All right. So I mean, it's funny how these things work sometimes.
Yeah, man. Yeah, man. But big up Beat Dog, man. I mean, even recently, like a couple years ago at Live Convention, like he had, uncovered a crazy collection and put a lot of it for sale at the convention. And I remember people were kind of tripping at all the stuff that was in the collection, man, because it was a lifetime of like, again, an OG from that time period that was letting go of their stuff. And it was a lot of great stuff in there, man. All those staple records that we all covet, but like good condition. You know what I mean? Because they were bought back then, right? So, but yeah, man.
Yeah. I'll ask you one last question. What do you care about?
What do I care about? Like what? Like,
In
can you
any
be more?
way. I mean, you can answer it however you want. You
Any?
could tell me something
I
that's happening today or something that's happening in the future, it be music or not.
I mean, I care about my friends. I care about my family. I care about music. And uh, I care about living a life with intention and purpose. Like I've done a lot of things that you said, Shom, in my life, and sort of like gone where the wind has kind of blown me. But I've also had a lot of structure. I've worked that entire time period on putting my energy towards, lots of things that matter to other people. You know what I mean? And specifically more from a working standpoint, right? Like you're grinding away at a job. And I think as more time goes on, I want to be able to live my life, creating things on my terms. That's what I care about, man. I care about creating things, um, you know, creating things in a way that matter to me, you know? And just, frankly, being able to create, period, and make a life creating is a gift and a privilege. So I don't want to get too greedy, but like, you know what I mean? If I can manifest a more, happy existence for myself, it would be to create things that I care about on my terms, that's really what I want to do. That's the goal, that's the goal that I'm living for. And that could manifest itself in, you know, a lot of different ways. But I think that's ultimately the goal, that in my heart, day to day, I could wake up and move with intention and meaningfulness and purpose, to try and create things that matter to me.
You deserve it all. Thanks for joining me, brother.
Appreciate it, man. Thank you so much.
Peace.